Welcome to Tracing Your Transatlantic Immigrants using FindMyPast.com. I'm James Tanner, and this webinar is being sponsored by FindMyPast.com. Records from the United Kingdom and the British Commonwealth nations can be valuable to genealogists around the world. The focus of this webinar is to investigate a few examples of genealogically important records concerning transatlantic immigration from Europe to America, with the assistance of this huge collection of records on the Find My Past website. The Find My Past website includes a collection of records from the United Kingdom, Ireland, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States. All of these records are important to genealogical researchers in the United States and Canada because many of the immigrants who came to America either came from the United Kingdom and Ireland or passed through the United Kingdom on their journey to North America. In addition, many of these records will prove to be valuable in tracking immigrants from their country of origin to America. This may be particularly true with immigrants from the United Kingdom, but it is also true due to the fact that the United Kingdom was a pathway to the Americas for other immigrants from the European continent. As genealogists, we need to remember that the British Empire stretched from around the world, and at its height, it was the largest empire in the world and lasted for over a century. All of these factors and many more emphasize the importance of the Find My Past collections. In considering the population of the North American continent, and particularly that part now in the United States, it is important to remember that except for the Native Americans who were already in the American continent when the Europeans began to arrive, everyone in America can trace their ancestry back to an immigrant. Ultimately, one of the major genealogical research challenges is discovering the country of origin, and even more specifically, the exact place of origin of those immigrants. Currently, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, there are approximately 81 million first or second generation immigrants in the United States. Historically, for example, from around 1850, the United States population increased by between 5 to 15% every 10 years due to immigrant arrivals. More recently, the numbers have gone up dramatically. Almost every one of my own family lines has been traced back to the immigrants. But in some lines, the research stops there. The majority of my own ancestors come from England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland. And for this reason, I am most interested in the Find My Past databases. One of the basic rules of genealogical research when investigating the origins of an immigrant ancestor is to begin research in the country of arrival rather than the country of origin. It is very tempting to begin looking for an ancestor using the name and date and a supposed location in the country of origin. But this process can be extremely frustrating and disappointing. I often compare this process to going out in the middle of a lake in a rowboat and shooting a gun into the water with the hope of hitting a fish. Finding an ancestor in his or her country of origin involves identifying very specifically the place of origin before research in historical records can really begin. The reason for this is that many people have the same or similar names, and absent knowledge of a specific location for their origin, it is practically impossible to determine which of the individuals with the same or similar surname are the ancestor in question. This highlights the importance of doing a good job of researching all that you can find out about the family in the country of arrival before trying to jump across the ocean to England or other countries. This slide shows the result of searching for one of my family names in the United Kingdom on the findmypast.com website. I searched for the surname Parkinson and found nearly 600,000 responses. Even if I filter these responses by dates, the number of possible Parkinsons is entirely unworkable. Once a researcher realizes that some names can be this common, it makes sense to spend most of your initial research in the country of arrival and identify the ancestor's place of origin as specifically as possible. One very effective way to connect ancestors who immigrated more recently from the United Kingdom is to compare entries in the United States Federal Census with records of those in the United Kingdom Census records. The first step is to locate the ancestor in the United States Federal Census record, and then locate the same individual or family in the United Kingdom Census records. Although the time period covered both the United States Federal Census and England, Wales, and Scotland census is limited to the last 150 to 200 years, this time period also covers when most of the immigrants came from Europe to America. To show one way of using the records on the findmypast.com website, I will draw upon an example from my own ancestral families. The Parkinson family originated in England and subsequently immigrated to Australia, and then my own part of the family emigrated further to the United States. As a consequence, I have Parkinson ancestors in England, Australia, and the United States. Because I have entered my family tree into the findmypast.com program, the program continually provides me with record hints pertaining to my ancestral lines. In this case, I have received several valuable record hints concerning my Parkinson's family. The dots next to the entries indicate pending record hints for my Parkinson ancestors. Before I begin this current round of investigation, my family records did not contain any references to the birth, marriage, or death records for my great-great-grandfather Thomas Parkinson and his ancestral line. In some cases, such as this one, the census records are an important step in locating the family in the country of origin. But it is even more important to have done the research in the country of arrival to give enough information to correctly identify the family. Fortunately, I had already obtained extensive research about the Parkinson family in Utah in the United States, and some additional information about Thomas Parkinson's ancestral family in England and Australia. But none of this information was supported by documentation. By using these record hints from findmypast.com and by making additional searches, I began by locating Thomas Parkinson in the United States Federal Census. I found him and his family in the United States Federal Census every 10 years from 1870 until 1900. He died in 1908. We often begin our genealogical research by searching for people by name, but we should learn the names that can change, but the actual location of a historical event does not change. We should turn our research efforts to locating the events and their locations in our ancestors' lives. Be sure you do not confuse the name of the place, which can change, with its geographic location, which cannot change. Our investigations need to be specific enough to identify exact locations whenever possible, even with name changes over time. This slide shows the facts and events for Thomas Parkinson on the FindMyPast.com website. The link to his record is in the United States Census for 1880. This record shows the Parkinson family with those children who were alive and at home on the date of the census. The U.S. Federal Census record shows the date the census was officially taken, on June 7, 1880, and the exact location in the Beaver City Precinct in Beaver County, Utah. Other helpful information that could assist in locating him in the United Kingdom census records includes his age, occupation, country of birth, and the birth country for his parents. When I examined the entry for Thomas Parkinson in the United States Federal Census, I found that the record shows that he was born in England. This census information is too general to be of much help in locating Thomas Parkinson's exact birthplace. But it is helpful to know that the 1900 U.S. Federal Census, the 1910 U.S. Federal Census, and the 1920 and 1930 censuses each indicate the person's year of immigration to the United States and the country of origin. However, my experience indicates that we need to be fairly cautious in accepting the country of origin at face value. The U.S. Census enumerators were not skilled in either geography or languages, and their interpretation of the birthplace is often too inaccurate or too general to be of much help. In this particular case, my existing research had already indicated that Thomas Parkinson was from England. Although the United States Federal Census records are a good place to start, they should never be taken as the final word on the country of origin. However, the U.S. Census record can establish, in many cases, approximately when the ancestor immigrated into the United States. If you are lucky enough to find your ancestor in the years when the immigration and or naturalization date was reported, the census records are very helpful. They're also helpful during those years when they report the language spoken by the immigrant. Sometimes the language spoken and the country cited do not agree. But then you have more clues to the research that needs to be done to determine the actual origin of your ancestor. To repeat, the United States Federal Census usually tells only the country of origin and does not usually include specific locations. When I say that it does not contain specific locations, I should really say that it hardly ever contains specific locations. But the important thing is that the entries in the census from the United States can be used as a pattern to look for the similar entries in the United Kingdom census records. And in those instances when your immigrant ancestor lived during the time when one of the census records recorded the date of immigration or naturalization, you will have the date to begin searching other records. If the United States Census record lists the date of immigration, then you can begin looking at the United Kingdom census beginning with the census record year that precedes the date of immigration. In my case, since my ancestors went from England to Australia before coming to America, I had to look at each census record to see if they were even in the United Kingdom during one of the census years. Using the general information from the United States Census record, I began my search in the years that corresponded to the time that Thomas Parkinson would have been in England. I found him in the 1841 England, Wales, and Scotland census records. Here is an image of the transcription record from findmypast.com of the 1841 census showing Thomas Parkinson. Of course, I would examine the entire census entry to see the information matched the family pattern given in the United States Federal Census records. In some cases, the census records may not be conclusive. There may be too many ambiguous matches. Because of my previous research, I was able to confirm undocumented family records that indicated that the family came from Huntingdonshire, now in Cambridgeshire. I did have to do some backup research to determine when the county changed from Huntingdonshire to Cambridgeshire. My previous records located the family in Huntingdonshire, so finding the family in the UK census in Cambridgeshire was a little bit disconcerting. And I was a little bit confused until I did the historical research. It turns out that Huntingdonshire merged with the Soke of Peterborough in 1965 and was later, in 1972, merged with Cambridgeshire, and the county was then called Cambridgeshire. Here is the original census record from the 1841 census. From this record, I can compare the families and determine if I have located the correct family in England. Here is an expanded view of the entry for Thomas Parkinson, showing him in the family of James Parkinson and his wife Elizabeth. In this case, the record agrees with the United States Census record as far as the date of birth of Thomas. In this particular case, I could not rely solely on the United States Census record because Thomas Parkinson immigrated to the United States without the rest of his family. So his records from the United States show him married and living in Utah. Because of my extensive documentation about his life in Utah, including the names of his parents and siblings, I was able to use the records on Find My Past to identify the specific location where he lived in England. For some reason, the specific documentation concerning the birth, marriage, or death records from the English Parkinson family were missing from my own personal records. Although, as I have mentioned, the records did indicate that the family came from Huntingdonshire. Here is a view of the transcription of the 1841 census. The importance of determining where Thomas Parkinson lived is that in order to continue doing research on his family line, I would have to find additional records for his parents, grandparents, and so forth. And therefore, there is a need to know the specific location of the family in England. As my image shows, I now have the name of the parish or township, in this case, Whittlesea, St. Mary, and St. Andrew. With this information, I was able to extend my family line in England and find missing family members. In fact, finding the family in the 1841 United Kingdom census was the key to discovering a lot of additional records about the family and adding family members that had not been found previously in over 100 years of my ancestors' genealogical records. I will now move to some other very valuable records that can be found on findmypast.com. Travel records are usually an important source for information about immigrants. I suggest that you search for passenger lists, ship manifests, immigration records, and ship records. Each of these categories may contain valuable information showing the movement of immigrants from Europe to America. Some of the other useful information that you may be able to obtain from travel records, such as these, includes the original name of the immigrant, and in some cases names of the immigrant's family or traveling companions. The name of the immigrant used when coming to America as a passenger may help in finding his or her original name. Many immigrants Americanized their names once they arrived in America. All these records may assist in finding the immigrant once they arrived in America and also help to identify the place of origin and sometimes even the exact place of origin. A ship manifest is a cargo document listing the cargo, passengers, and crew of the ship, aircraft, or vehicle for use of customs or other officials. In some cases, a cargo ship may have also carried passengers. Importantly, for genealogical research, many of the ship's manifests have been preserved. Usually the document was called a passenger list if the ship was primarily a passenger vessel. Both manifests and passenger lists have been preserved in various databases. In order to illustrate the use of passenger lists, I will refer to my William Linton family. This family left Ireland before 1851, and I have no accurate records of their origin in Ireland or their arrival in the United States. I have done extensive research on this family in the United States, attempting to locate them in Ireland. My research included visiting the United States National Archives in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, where they lived when they came to the United States, and in the Philadelphia City Archives. Even the United States Census records were of little value because of the large number of similar names of the people from Ireland. The only records we had in the United States indicated that the family may have come from County Tyrone in Northern Ireland. Even the record I had from the daughter of one of the children of the family, Samuel Linton, recorded a place in Northern Ireland that did not exist. Continuing my research, I turned my attention to passenger records, hoping to find more specific evidence of their Irish origins. In searching on findmypast.com, I found in the United States Atlantic Ocean and Gulf Coast ports passenger lists from 1820 to 1874. This particular collection contained over 1 million records and could provide the first and last name, the age, the birth year, the birthplace or nationality, the arrival year, and the ship's name. Without my previous extensive research in U.S. records, however, these passenger lists would have been of little use. My Linton family members had very common names, and I would need some way to verify that I had the right family. After searching the collection on Find My Past, I found the following records of the family. The first record that I found was for William Linton, who was one of the children, and I was able to identify the family by the fact that the other family members were listed. To repeat my earlier statement, this points out again the importance of doing research in the country of arrival. In this case, I needed to have known the names of the family members before I began to search, or I would never have been able to identify this William Linton as my relative. My previous research showed that the family may have stayed in Canada for some time, but I only knew for sure that the family eventually arrived in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I was surprised to find that the family had entered the United States at Passamaquoddy, Maine. Unfortunately, this card did not give me any more information about the last permanent residence of the family, but it did confirm that the family came from Ireland. It also gave me a more specific date of entry into the United States. Previously, I had only a range of years before their arrival. Missing from this record is the father of the family, also named William Linton, and my direct line ancestor, Samuel. So I am still looking for their U.S. arrival records or a passenger list. It is possible that William and his son Samuel came earlier to work and to save and pay for passage and the rest of the family. In addition to the original card for William Linton, I was able to find this card for Josiah Linton. This has the same information that was contained on the previous card and shows the family members as they were, excluding Josiah and including William. Each card helped to establish the members of the family and identify the children with information on their ages and gender. It's important to examine each card carefully and to squeeze as much information out of the record as possible. Here's a card for John Linton. Note that each card gives some specific information about the family members. Mary Ann Linton appears on this card. In every instance, the records list other passengers who are members of the family or traveling together. Here are the copies of all the rest of the cards that I found. Now we're back to the Parkinson family. As I discovered from the records, the family made a trip from England to Australia, and they were not arrested, and as immigrants, they were neither arrested nor were they transported, as were many Australian immigrants. They actually came to Australia as subsidized immigrants under an immigration program. They then immigrated to the United States. From my standpoint, in looking at this family, it's my great advantage that Find My Past has records from both Australia and the United States, and including the United Kingdom. Family stories told about the family's immigration to Australia, but again, I had no documentation to support the story. One of the minor mysteries of the Parkinson immigration to Australia is the fact that one of James Parkinson's daughters married a man named Edward Rodwell in Australia. Later, Edward Rodwell and Sarah Parkinson were divorced, and Edward Rodwell married Sarah Parkinson's sister, and they then leave and go to England. So part of this family's descendants end up in England, part in Australia, and my direct ancestors settle in the United States. After the divorce, Sarah Parkinson is one of the members of the family who immigrated to the United States, and subsequently remarries one of my other relatives from England by way of Australia, a Stapley. My great-grandfather Henry Tanner married two wives, one a Parkinson and one a Stapley, who were cousins and both descendants of these immigrants. So your pedigree can get pretty complicated, and some of these relationships can only be untangled by finding specific historical records about the family. Searching for the records to document this strange set of circumstances, I found the marriage record in New South Wales for the marriage between Edward Rodwell and Sarah Parkinson. This still leaves one of the questions to be resolved. Who is Edward Rodwell? Further searching located the convict transportation registers from 1787 to 1870, where I found Edward Rodwell in the record of his conviction and transportation from England. I can zoom in to the end to see the details of the record. It's a little bit difficult to read, but the record gives information about his conviction as a criminal in England and the date and place. The documentation continues with the convict arrivals in New South Wales from 1788 to 1842. This record gives the name of the ship carrying the convicts to Australia and the arrival date in Australia, both of which can lead to finding additional records concerning the ship, its passengers, and the date that it left England. This information helps to resolve the mystery of Edward Rodwell, the marriages to the two sisters, and his origin in both England and Australia. When searching for information about immigrants, it is important to be creative and include all sorts of records, some of which may not seem at first to be worth the effort. The advantage of Find My Past is that there are many types of records that you may not have considered or did not even know existed. Irish immigrants historically made up the second largest group of immigrants to come to the United States. However, identifying the exact place of origin of an Irish immigrant, as with my own ancestors, can be a real challenge. When we're looking for information about immigrants, it is always important to remember the newspapers. Some of the other interesting and valuable records on the FindMyPast.com website include these Irish death notices in American newspapers. Quoting from the description of these records on FindMyPast.com, there are about 36,000 death notices listed. Death notices were paid announcements, usually written by a family member and sent to the newspaper. It would have been a cost to the family to have a notice in a newspaper. In these records, we can see that the families of the deceased felt it was important to have a notice in the American newspaper, even if the person did not die in America. In addition to death notices, there is a collection of marriage notices. Again, from the FindMyPast.com website, each record includes a transcript taken from an American newspaper marriage announcement. The announcements are from 4 American newspapers: the New York Herald, the Brooklyn Eagle, the New York World, and the Phoenix newspaper. These are announcements of marriages which occurred all over the world, from England to Australia, of people originally from Ireland and of various religious denominations. The amount of information listed varies, but the Irish marriages in American newspapers usually include the following information about your ancestor: the names of the bride and groom, the marriage year, the marriage date, the place of marriage, the newspaper date, the groom's county and country birthplace, the bride's county and country birthplace, the bride and groom's parents, and the minister. As you can see, these records may be very instrumental in locating an immigrant ancestor. And these announcements appear in some of the most popular newspapers in America at the time and could be the key to finding your ancestral family. As genealogists, we often search in places that may seem remote from our ancestral families, but we're sometimes surprised to find them mentioned in records that were created a long way from their residence. I'm used to finding records in states where my family did not live and in newspapers across the country. Another valuable index on FindMyPast.com contains records of Irish famine immigrants from 1846 to 1851. I was very interested in this particular collection because of my Irish ancestors who left Ireland during that time. Unfortunately, they did not appear in the collection, but you might have better luck with your own Irish ancestors. You might want to note the amount of information that is contained in this Irish famine immigrants database. It includes information concerning their occupation, their point of departure, and other information that could be valuable in finally locating their origin in Ireland. In looking around at more of the immigration resources on Find My Past, I find that there are complete index copies of Germans to America and Italians to America. If you're not familiar with these two series, they are multi-volume lists of extensive research showing many of the passengers coming to America from Germany or Italy. There are 67 volumes in the Germans to America series, and each volume contains approximately 70,000 immigrants. In the original books, they are arranged alphabetically within specific time periods. The books cover the time period between 1850 and 1897. It's extremely valuable to have an online searchable index to this extensive collection. The Italians to America book series, which is also online and indexed, covers the time period from 1855 to 1900 and includes nearly 1 million Italian immigrants who arrived in America. These immigrants came through the ports of Baltimore, Boston, New Orleans, New York, and Philadelphia. There are 26 volumes in the Italians to America series, all of which once again are online and indexed on FindMyPast.com. Another valuable record found on the FindMyPast.com website is Russians to America. This immigration record collection, provided by the United States National Archives and Records Administration, contains official extracts from more than 500,000 arriving immigrants from Russia at the ports of Baltimore, Boston, New Orleans, New York, and Philadelphia between 1834 and 1897. Russian immigration to America may include the following fields: the first name, the last name, the birth year, the year of arrival, the occupation, the country of origin, the city or town of last residence, the port of arrival, the destination, and the travel compartment. The most valuable of these for locating the immigrant would be the city or town of last residence. It also includes the port of departure, the date of arrival, and the ship's name. Sometimes genealogical researchers in the United States seem to forget or overlook the fact that early colonies in the eastern portion of the United States were part of England. Find My Past has some additional records during the colonial times. One example is the Massachusetts Mayflower Passengers 1620 book, published back in 1920. This book is digitized and indexed on Find My Past. In searching, I was able to find my ancestor on the Mayflower, John Cook. This next slide shows another interesting record collection. The United States officers and members of the Scotch-IRISH Society of America in 1891. This is another example of the type of record that you may not know about or even consider. If your family came from Northern Ireland, here's another possible place to search for information. You'll note that it includes the full name, city and state of residence, address, place of birth, occupation, parents' names, mother's maiden name, grandparents' names, for the purpose of supporting the claim to Scotch-Irish ancestry, and immigration details, all of which could be invaluable in assisting you in finding your immigrant ancestor. You also need to remember that findmypast.com will search all of these records and sets and more for your ancestors. Of course, there are many, many more records on findmypast.com. In this presentation, I have tried to highlight a few of these records and how I've used them to find some of the information about my own ancestors. I hope you have the same success that I have had. Thanks for watching, and I hope you take the opportunity to tune in again.